database, which was free last year, which we were just talking about before we came on. But I guess we shouldn't plug it before we plug our own stuff. But Football Outsiders DVOA is now premium and a real pain in the ass to get into Excel at 8 a.m. in the morning when you're paying for it last minute. But thankfully, I got in, so we got the best data for everybody, Lofty. That's what we care about, the best possible data for all the people out there.
Spags will dip into his own pockets just to get that for you on this free program. That's just how we do it. How you feeling, man?
I'm feeling good. I'm excited. I mean, look, we know one thing, Lofty, we talked about it a little bit on chat. The thing I'm most excited for, it's Josh Allen week, which we're going to talk about, I'm sure, pretty much the entire hour and a half we're doing the show. I'm just going to keep circling every topic back to Josh Allen like it's one of my talking points. I'm a politician. But I'm excited, man. It's week one was interesting, some successes, some failures, but sure we'll talk about all those over the course of the hour.
Yeah, no question. And we are, of course, going to take a first look at ownership projections, which I'm pretty excited about. On the site right now, you've got ownership projections and player projections, both updated. Were updated early this morning, so we get our first look. We'll talk about that. And if you want to see them for yourself, go to awesemo.com/join and check out all of the plans that we have offered there. We even have basic videos, tutorials explaining exactly what you get in all of those packages, so you're not caught, buying into something that you're not familiar with or that you didn't want. So if you want to get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus subscription, just use the promo code NFL Strategy, all one word, NFL Strategy, awesemo.com/join. All of these tools developed and used every day by Alex Baker, Awesemo himself. And if you're wondering if they work, well, just see where he finishes in most tournaments almost every night, and you'll get a good idea. Awesemo.com/join. Use the promo code NFL Strategy and join us over there. And be sure to introduce yourself, say what's up in the NFL Slack chat or the premium Slack chat when you do. All right, Spags. Let's get a little of this out of the way first. The Antonio Brown saga was really amusing for a while. Now this shit has just gotten out of control.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've kind of thought, and it's sort of tough to talk about because, it's mental health is a big issue this week. We had National Suicide Awareness. I'm not trying to make it depressing right away. But, there's a lot of stuff with that goes hand in hand. And when you see somebody going off the deep end and maybe you have some personal experience, I'm sure we all have somebody in our family who suffered from mental illness, and you see those kind of extremes and those lows. It's tough. And I think my tendency is to not make too much fun, even though you could just be a dick. Like, that's also a thing. But the reports this week, I was listening to Bill Simmons' podcast overnight, and he was talking excitedly about Antonio Brown with one of his buddies. And after the allegations came out, it was like they were recording while that was going on. And they just edited the Pats part out entirely. And it's just confusing. It's like, what are we doing here with him? What is he doing? Is he being defamed? Is he being dragged through the mud? Like it seemed maybe some of those reports were with the Raiders leaking, like, oh, he's talking to a social media consultant. He's trying to get out of his contract. But it's also like maybe he's just a tortured or not good dude. And you have to see the process through, but it's not the best.
Well, no, it's not. And I try not to make like any psychological diagnosis on the show because in case you're wondering, I'm not qualified. But I mentioned this last week, Spags. It's so strange to me that like you even have guys like Ian Rappaport being like, Mike Tomlin deserves awards for managing and handling Antonio Brown. And, how could the Oakland Raiders bungle this? Is no one considering that maybe he has some type of illness that's progressively grown worse over the past year or two, and that's playing into this situation? Like, I'm sure it's been mentioned, but every time I go on Twitter, it's like, give Mike Tomlin all the props in the world, and how could the Raiders do this? To me, it seems like it's certainly more than that.
Yeah, it seems like Mike Tomlin maybe didn't comment out of both that concern and also he just wants to focus on the guys in the building, and that's kind of always been his ethos. But, and I think it might have been as much like biting his tongue about not wanting to say something on-PC as it was him just not wanting to like get more headlines about that, which like a guy who's not in their locker room. But it just seems like it's all been problematic, and it's all I think this certainly puts his status in question for this week, I would say, with some really big allegations, some sort of damning emails coming from him, some damning unintelligible emails, I guess would be the best way to put it. Not to laugh too much, but those emails were street gibberish.
Did you read would you say street gibberish? Did you read the guy that translated them? The funniest thing in the world.
I did.
If you go into the guy that tweeted out the images of the emails, someone goes, "Can we get a translation?" So somebody else actually like took the time to translate them into, proper English. And it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Yeah,
But
look, I mean, to be clear, I said straight gibberish. Street gibberish sounds kind of racist, but straight gibberish, I think is fine. But yeah, I don't know. It's just he's in a different headspace. Like I think those emails too read a little manic, so it's sort of weird. And the whole situation seems. I mean, we can't talk about it on this show, but he's doing some things while watching church videos, which should not be done while watching church videos on an iPad.
probably not. No. Can I say this though? And I'm not taking sides. I make no judgments. We have no idea what happened. Innocent until proven guilty. The problem is in the NFL, it's not a court of law, so teams in the league can do whatever they want. Of course, it has to go through a process, but it did seem almost like in the emails he was saying, like, I saw you and your mom trying to set me up, and it's not going to happen. I did get a little vibe from that. So again, I do think there's always one side, another side, and then the truth. I think eventually it'll come out. It's just a matter of whether or not he's put on, what's it called? What leave is it called that they're saying he could be put on?
Commissioner's exempt status, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Exempt, non-football exempt or whatever it is, which means he wouldn't be eligible to play. Do the Patriots release him? If you just were speculating, what do you think comes of this? Do you expect him to play this week?
Yeah, I was going to ask what you thought the odds were. I think I would put it at 50-50 for him to play this week. I mean, I think the fact that this news came out early in the week probably gives him a greater chance of not playing and being sat in some way because he's not going to be exonerated within 7 days. And I think they're certainly going to err on the side, or at least one would think. I mean, the NFL's rulings on these are so you have no idea from 1 to 1 how they're going to do. Tyreek Hill gets nothing despite audio of him trying to talk about breaking his son's arm and beating up a lady potentially. Kareem Hunt gets whatever because his is on video. So I mean, nothing's on video, but there's emails and stuff and some, I don't know. I think I would err on the side of him probably not playing this week, but it being the NFL, I think it's got to be 50-50.
All right. Yeah, last thing on this too. The interesting element of all of this is if he doesn't play, nothing changes. Like, in seasonal leagues, everyone goes back to where you drafted them at. Maybe you like Philip Dorsett as a flyer, but I mean, nothing really changes, Spags, if Antonio Brown isn't there. Just meaning like nothing changes from week 1 and nothing changes from, pre-draft, preseason type rankings and projections.
I mean, call it a hunch. I assume the Patriots would still be at least a 17-point favorite, probably, maybe 16 as a low point. So yeah, I would agree overall. And I think we'll see more Philip Dorsett ownership because of that big game that he had there and getting open on those plays. Probably would be a little, I mean, not chalky, but certainly pick up a little more ownership. But yeah, overall, it's the same situation going against a Dolphins team who was just like slap fighting in the back in the secondary and just not, I mean, if they were even slap fighting, they weren't even touching guys. So that might be giving them too much credit. I think either way, I mean, this is the Patriots team who should just destroy him. And despite whatever historical things, I'm sure people will point out in the chat of like, well, the Dolphins play them close no, it's not the same team this year.
Yeah, no, the Dolphins don't want to play anyone close this year. It opened at minus 15.5. It's still 18.5. So nothing's changed yet, but we'll pay attention to that. I honestly, if the line didn't move at all, I wouldn't be surprised. In all seriousness, I really wouldn't. They're just a dominant football team from top to bottom. And they have an embarrassment of riches at the offensive position, which is funny because in like July, you thought they were going into the season with Julian Edelman and a cast of scrubs.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, look, we saw some guys there. I mean, Jacoby Myers is getting targeted deep down the field as well. Josh Gordon, I think now that we know he's back in there and we saw him and he looked back physically and he looked gigantic out there, which they pointed out a lot of times on commentary. I think these guys are ready to go against the Dolphins. I mean, maybe it'll be a tougher matchup down the stretch if they're playing, I don't know, Houston or the Chiefs or somebody, but they definitely don't need Antonio Brown in week 2 against the Dolphins team who might as well have us out there playing corner and safety.
All right. So, you and I are going to take a look at Beyond the Numbers. We did it last week. We'll do it again this week. You came up with some great stuff. In case you're wondering, yes, Spags is going to talk about Josh Allen.
I mean, are we doing it right now? We do want to do him up front?
No. We'll get to it later. Just a little tease there.
Okay. A little professional radio tease. I like that.
Right,
yeah,
that's right. Keep
Look, I have a brand, and now, like, I think too, there's one other Beyond the Numbers stat, which I think is sort of the Josh Allen effect, probably more the Kansas City Chiefs effect. But I think we have some really fun numbers this week. It's really weird, man. Like I guess we could spoil this a little bit because I don't want to spoil the actual number itself, but the amount of deep targets in the NFL. Like they always say the NFL is a copycat league. When you see a team win with defense or win with squeezing the air out of the ball with a run, you see then teams do that. Last year we saw the Chiefs and the Rams win with deep passes. And guys who probably shouldn't be getting deep passes are getting deep passes this week. And I thought that was kind of crazy, the volume that was coming on deep routes.
Yeah, I do too. So we're going to do a little Josh Allen, little Tyreek Hill, little, well, I suppose you want to talk about this this Arizona pass catch, the receiver corps. Two of them played, I think, 90, or actually it may have been three of them played 90+% of the snaps. So another interesting one. And I think you have Damian Willis mixed in there as well. So we'll get into all of that. First, Spags, let's take a look at some ownership. It is posted at awesemo.com. And right now, looking on DraftKings specifically, it's pretty flat. And one that stands out to me, I can only imagine it's going to come up throughout the week. And, you know, full disclosure, bit of a disclaimer, I should say, these ownership projections will change throughout the week. So whatever you see now, you know, it's a good judgment of where they will be compared to the field. But, you know, barring injuries, they will still change. And you will see some pretty dramatic movement with certain players. I think we could see that with Josh Jacobs. He's $4,700 right now, highest or second highest projected player. So there is that, but at 21%, that does seem like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe because there are so many, you know, there's 13 games. Maybe that's accurate, but 23 carries, 2 touchdowns in his NFL debut. Granted, I don't expect them to be playing with the lead very often, but at the same time, that price point is really, really low for a guy that's clearly their 3-down back.
Yeah, and I think, too, one thing which I thought with him, I didn't think he was going to have quite that good of a day. I also thought Denver's defense would be better than Miami Dolphins quality, and they were very much not. They couldn't get any pressure at all, which kind of shocked me, given the talent they have and Vic Fangio being in there. But yeah, Josh Jacobs, I thought was not super impressive in terms of bursts and all that, but just kind of a solid 3-down back who greatly cut into Jalen Richard. And that was sort of my concern with Jalen Richard overall. But he just had one rushing attempt, not much in the way of targets. I think those are all kind of worrisome numbers for a guy, if you're a person who was a big Richard believer, but also really good signs for Josh Jacobs, where even if he's not the most explosive, even if he's not breaking long, kind of elusive runs, he is still a guy who's going to get that volume in the pass game or at least a little bit, or have that opportunity to get it in the pass game because he's in there on third downs. He was getting handoffs. But yeah, the Chiefs spot, I mean, we saw last week with Leonard Fournette, our boy. So let's think about this while I was walking the dogs, and this is just a weird tangent. If you call him Lenny Fournette, he sounds like a burnout. If you call him Len Fournette, he sounds like the CEO of like an eyeglasses company. I think that's kind of – but we saw what happens with that spot, that game script when it goes south with the Chiefs kind of reaching a blowout. And Fournette was a guy we both liked quite a bit, and the projections liked quite a bit, and he just tanked. And Josh Jacobs, even if he's in there, I don't know that he's an elite pass catcher who's going to really help out on those third downs. So I'm going to be I'll probably be afraid to not match the field after the great Austin Ekeler debacle of last week for me. But Josh Jacobs, the volume is there, and I think it's hard to question volume. That's one thing we learned during week 1. Volume is volume.
Dude, volume over efficiency, man. More times than not, that's going to get you where you need to go. But the thing with me is I thought it was a mistake to assume that, like, I thought it was a mistake to assume that Jalen Richard was, you know, just going to come in and have a similar workload as last year. They drafted Josh Jacobs for a very specific reason, right? We know why they wanted Josh Jacobs on this football team. Last season, they had no depth at running back. Marshawn Lynch, what did they have? Doug Martin back there in the backfield too. Like it was really ugly. They didn't have really any backfield weapons to lean on. With Josh Jacobs, when you're feeding him that much of the workload, which I would expect to continue, there's really not a whole lot of room and there's not a whole lot of ball left for Jalen Richard. Jacobs plays 74% of snaps. Alec Ingold played 26. Jalen Richard had 9 snaps out of 58 offensive snaps, 16%. DeAndre Washington had 9%. So, I mean, it's not like Jalen Richard even had a distinct edge over DeAndre Washington in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were a Rashard believer, if you have him in season long, you're stashing him because he was a decent PPR guy, and for time to time, if you just couldn't get one of the elite or non-elite or even playable running backs, I think he's a guy. He's just out of consideration. This is Josh Jacobs' team. I think it's sort of weird because I was a guy too, was a believer in Kerryon Johnson. I kind of thought I didn't know if he's going to get a bell cow role, but I thought he'd get more than he did, especially in that pace-up spot where there were a ton of plays in that game with Detroit and Arizona. But Josh Jacobs, to me, was the one running back who jumped out as like, okay, this guy is actually a bell cow back besides like Dalvin Cook. And even he had more of a timeshare. Like, I think he's a guy who jumps out where he's going to have the target share. If you could somehow get him in your league, you probably can after week one. But if he has a down week this week versus Kansas City, he's going to get that volume, and he's worth just going back to every week.
For sure. Where do you think his ownership settles into for, say, like the Millie Maker or the $9 slam? What do you think? What do you think we get on Josh Jacobs?
I mean, let's see. We haven't projected at 21% right now in DK.
Yeah.
I would guess that comes up to, I mean, based on the numbers last week where he just had the touchdowns and he had the volume, I think people probably aren't going to dig much deeper than that. Probably we're talking 30% by the end of the week, I would guess. I mean, we also thought that at Fournette, though, and that didn't come through. But at his price, I feel like there's a value here to Jacobs that there wasn't totally to Fournette, and also less pivots at that price point. So 30%, maybe even above 30 by the time it's all said and done.
Yeah, it's very possible. And for what it's worth, Leonard Fournette's ownership across different contests was really fascinating. Like in these high stakes one, I think it was $1,000 entry. I forget which one it was, single entry. Fournette was like 70%.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I think the higher up in stakes it went, the more Leonard Fournette we saw. The lower in stakes, the less Fournette we saw. But another spot that's really interesting to me is in this same game with the same team, Tyrell Williams, Darren Waller. I'm telling you right now, look, I drafted this guy in every league I possibly could going into the season. Was a big fan of him. I threw him in the sleepers article for tight ends. I was excited about him. And there are some guys I get excited about, and then after week 1 and 2, I say, you know, it looks like I might not be right on this. I could definitely be wrong. After seeing Darren Waller in week 1, granted it's only week 1, I felt really good about his chances of being a legitimate, you know, starting caliber tight end. Good hands, didn't drop a pass, yards after the catch, athletic, solid route runner. I really liked what I saw from him. And I liked what I saw from Tyrell Williams. Created separation, got open. Again, good hands. Like Derek Carr was on point, but these guys didn't drop anything on the day. And like you said, he carved up this Denver defense, but let's not pretend that this was the Giants defense out there either.
Yeah, I mean, this was a defense which I really thought was going to take a big leap this year in Denver. I thought having Vic Fangio in there, that he was going to kind of move the pieces around similar to how he did with Chicago. I think, you know, Khalil Mack is obviously an elite player, but Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, these guys have similar physical skill sets. And Von Miller's certainly been a Super Bowl champion who's been really the driving force. So I was shocked by that. And I was listening to Christopher Harris's podcast, the guy who, by the way, Laffy, I beat in our Osmo Celebrity League. So I'm better than Christopher Harris.
Beautiful.
But I still listen to him, even though I am officially better in every possible way. I think that, he was talking about some of these stats with and some of the situations with Denver, and he was like, maybe the offensive line for Oakland is just that good. Maybe we've kind of been overlooking them, but maybe they've gelled and they've had a lot of the guys there for 2 consecutive years under Gruden. So I think that could be a thing that is actually a factor to consider. Maybe Denver's defense isn't quite as bad. But yeah, Terrell Williams carved him up. I mean, Williams had an 86% catch rate. Waller had an 88% catch rate. And these guys, Williams was the clear deep target. He was getting a lot of air yards, 17.9 air yards per target. Waller more close to the line, just 7 air yards per target. I think Waller's stats are a little more repeatable. I mean, I think Williams is going to have 50. But like Waller just being right there at the line, he's the safety valve. That's what Jared Cook was last year, and he had a monster year.
Exactly. And that's nice. What was his average depth of target? Do you have that on Waller?
6.9. So very nice for him.
Right. And he racked up some yards after the catch as well. Not a ton, of course, but he wasn't just going down every time he got the ball. He was carrying defenders at times. And I believe Tyrell Williams' only ball that wasn't caught was well overthrown. So I like what I've seen from them. How willing are you to, stack Oakland? Because the ownership right now doesn't seem that crazy. Darren Waller, just using DraftKings ownership here, 9%. Tyrell Williams coming in around 11.5. It's normally you'd be like, oh, well, that's decent ownership. And Jacobs at 21%. But given that Jacobs is 4,700, Williams is 44, and Waller is 34, I personally thought that we would see higher ownership, 33, higher ownership on all three of these guys after Monday night.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's tough for me because I'm not comfortable with it fully because I don't know that I completely trust Oakland. But one thing that does help out, the Kansas City pass rush, according to PFF's grades, they are down to a 61 graded pass rush, which is one of my big concerns with them losing D Ford, making a couple of changes in the defensive unit. They were not getting great pressure on Jacksonville, even with Gardner Minshew in there. Obviously, Foles, they got pressure on that one play and shattered his clavicle, but still had a touchdown on a deep pass on that play that they did get pressure. So I don't know if the pressure is going to be there quite as well as it was there for them last year. And that's, I think, an issue for that offense and that defense, because the offense is going to put up so many points. So I can get there with the Oakland chalk. I think I'm more inclined to get there with the pass game than Josh Jacobs, because Josh Jacobs, to me, I mean, volume and value is there, but I think with his ownership, like we talked about, potentially getting that chalky, I think if you go to Williams Carr, like a Williams Carr Waller stack, that could be one that has a lot of potential and a lot of targets and a lot of room to run horizontally, which they were trying to do a lot with Waller, kind of similar to George Kittle, getting him out there east to west, and he can kind of use that speed, that athleticism to get out there. I like those guys as pivots to Jacobs if he is going to be the uber chalk we're thinking he might be.
Okay. And I'll say this much. You said you don't know if you trust them, Oakland's passing attack or their offense altogether. I don't either, but I'm also not paying up for them. Like, they literally didn't see – actually – compared to the Monday night slate, their prices have come down. Bigger slate, of course, so it's really hard. It's not apples to apples, but still, you're not getting any type of price increase there, assuming the salaries had come out on Sunday night. So there you have it, and it's a spot to take advantage of. Running back position, there are some high-priced running backs, all of whom every single week are capable of breaking slates. Kamara, $8,200. You got Barkley at $9,200 against Buffalo. Surprising, relatively difficult matchup there, though. Dalvin Cook, $72. But no, you know what? Let's stay above this. Let's stay with the top priced guys right now in Barkley, Elliott, and Kamara. Right now, Kamara with the highest projected ownership, not only amongst running backs but overall, and Barkley coming in significantly lower, about 15%. It's just really, really difficult for me to look at Kamara's projected ownership and not say, I want to have like triple that in this game.
Yeah, I agree. That was how I felt about McCaffrey in week one. I was kind of surprised he was high owned as he was, and he was a slate breaker. This defense for the Rams is just not good. The run defense grade they got in week one, a 55 run defense grade, even worse than they were in 2018. And that was a spot I really wanted to target with McCaffrey. We kind of saw the volume as well for Kamara, 20 touches. That's up for him a little bit less of a Mark Ingram role for Latavius Murray, which certainly could shift as the season goes on and he gets more comfortable in the offense. But I think they're really going to rely on Kamara. And I also think this Rams team cannot defend the run and also has a hard time bringing guys down. I guess their tackle grade wasn't that bad from PFF, but it just seemed like McCaffrey was able to kind of squeeze through holes. And Kamara is just a pinball. We saw so many runs where, I mean, Houston's defense was really good at run defense last year. Granted, they lost Clowney. That's a pretty big loss. But still, like, that run defense was really good. And Kamara, just even though he had some plays where he just kind of get gobbled up by the line, there were so many plays where he just bounced off of three guys and broke tackles and moved around. He's good. He could be a slate breaker this week. He could have that McCaffrey upside, maybe not quite that high. I think he's hard to avoid as chalk. And I'm with you. I think I'd much rather have him than Barkley because Buffalo's run defense, I think, is scary. They throttled Le'Veon Bell.
Dude, they absolutely did. Le'Veon Bell's production came in the passing game. And to be fair to Barkley, that could be the case with him too. But really, do you want to pay an extra $1,000 for him when Alvin Kamara's ceiling is the same in a game that should see a monster total and a lot more opportunity to score? Because right now, the total on this game is what, 54 points? I believe it's the highest on the entire slate. And that to me, stands out. Buffalo and the New York Giants have a 43 and a half implied total. That doesn't inspire a ton of confidence. Now, there are a few players from this game that I really like, to be clear, but 53 over under for the Saints and the Rams. It's just tough to believe that this game is like, a 7-3 game going into halftime.
Yeah, especially knowing what we know of how New Orleans was, I mean, completely chafed by that whole outcome in the NFC title game. And they're coming in here, I'm sure, with a degree of vengeance on their mind. And also this team, too, are, I guess, so there was a lot of pace. This is probably another thing that would have been interesting number beyond the numbers kind of thing. But the pace of both the Rams and the New Orleans, both guys playing, or both teams rather, playing at a 26.3 seconds per snap pace. And that is a very low number. The Giants actually played with a lot of pace in week 1, too, as did Buffalo. So maybe this might just be an industry or a league-wide trend. But yeah, like a lot of pace in this game with New Orleans and the Rams, a lot of scoring expected. And the revenge, too. New Orleans certainly wants to come out and send a message. A team who they could be playing in the NFC title game again if your Eagles don't get there after how they look. Or my Cowboys, actually. Let's put them both in there. But yeah, like I think the spot for Kamara is just, I love it quite a bit. And I think I imagine I'll be there a ton. And Barkley can have a bounce back week too, and probably deserves some exposure. But chalk Kamara, I'm very comfortable with much more than Josh Jacobs chalk.
Yeah, I certainly am too. Cantor in chat, in YouTube chat, said it's the Buffalo passing defense that's good. You can run on them, and they will. I'm not sleeping on their run defense either. A team that stayed very competitive last season did so not because of Josh Allen, at times maybe, but because the defense was really bolstered pretty much everywhere. So is it an elite run defense? Maybe not, but just the matchup on the other side for Kamara, given the over under, the projected total here, and really just his overall involvement. I like him just as much. Actually, I like him more. I guess the only question would be, like, if you had to project out touches or total looks, what do you give to Kamara? What do you give to Barkley? I don't think it would be that far off. Maybe a couple more for Barkley, but I don't know if it'd be that far off.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially with no Sterling Shepard out there, potentially he's in concussion protocol right now. I think the assumption is that he's probably not going to be out there. And that means like that's going to have some ripple effects for the Giants, where Cody Latimer was very highly targeted in week 1. If he's got Tre'Davious White on him, Cody Latimer is not getting separation on Tre'Davious White. So that is not a spot where I think they can target quite as much as they did in week 1, with a lot of air yards as well for Latimer. So that could help out Barkley, who only had 6 targets and 4 catches in week 1. And he only had 15 total touches, which not the best for Saquon Barkley compared to Kamara's 20 especially. But I would imagine they would both be around 20 touch guys this week. And I would favor Barkley a little bit in touches, but I disagree a little bit with that Buffalo run defense take. They gave up, I mean, this is just week 1. They gave up 3.2 yards per rush this year. Last year, just 4.2. I think there's something about, they're not like high level, but I think there's something about just a solid tackling, well game plan team. I think it's what Buffalo's been since Sean McDermott came over there, is that they're just a team who's going to really kind of defend well across the board. And I think that is a skill which maybe doesn't translate perfectly to numbers.
Yeah, and another thing too is Barkley's usage, just in terms of total looks compared to plays run, is one thing, but how are they going to move the football? And I think that's another question that comes into play. They couldn't move it against Dallas. Actually, that's not fair. They put a lot of yards up on Dallas. They just couldn't get into the end zone. But I feel like you just have such an easier time moving the football if you're the Saints. Look, I have no problem going to Barkley in any matchup, honestly. I just think you're getting better value on Kamara, who, like you said, Latavius Murray had some involvement, but I mean, really, it wasn't something to push me away. 21 total looks for Kamara, 13 carries. And I'd say when you watch those carries, these were not fluky chunk yardage plays. Like, he was shedding tackles every single time he toted the rock. So I don't know. I love the guy, and the upside is just significant every time he's on the field. What about Austin Ekeler, up to 6,100? He's getting some ownership. Nothing crazy, though. Again, everything's subject to change, but he's around 13.5%. Going up against Detroit, I accurately predicted that the Colts would keep that game close, which was really great for Ekeler, really great for Marlon Mack. What do you make of this? What do you see the game script being against Detroit in Detroit?
Yes, I mean, the Ekeler thing last week, I really thought that he wasn't going to see quite as much volume. I thought it was going to be more of a split share with Justin Jackson, and he did have more. Granted, he was kind of the hot hand, so that could have kind of increased his share of snaps. I believe he was at 75% of the snaps compared to Justin Jackson, which is a pretty big difference. And the thing with Ekeler, if he's getting 18 touches a game, he's so explosive where I think you saw a lot of those touches were just kind of garbage touches. He just ran into the line. He's small. He really does have a lot of the flaws, I think, which were my concern in week one. I think a lot of people who had concerns about him, it's just he's not a 20 touch guy generally. He's so explosive where even though that Colts defense had him covered up a couple times, he just squeezed out like a water bug and kind of made those moves. And I would imagine they're just going to keep riding him. I mean, we saw some decent signs of life from Detroit. I mean, they made enough changes defensively where you would think they'd be better than they were. And they really did kind of hold Arizona down for the first 3 quarters of that game. But then once Kyler Murray started airing it out, I think it did open the game up, did open the field up quite a bit. I'm probably going to be over the field on Ekeler because I feel bad about not having enough of him in week one. And that's probably the stupid play. But I like what I saw of him, and he was really explosive and the volume was there. And if he goes down to 10 touches this week, I will be a very sad panda. But I think you gotta trust the volume again, and he really did have the volume and the snap share.
Yep, I'm with you. Justin Jackson got worked in, but nothing to lead you to believe that it would be concerning for Austin Ekeler. In the passing game too, I'd say there was some disappointment level as far as Hunter Henry goes, but he played 91% of the snaps. So he was on the field a lot. That's still encouraging to me. I think he still saw 6 targets. Look, that could have easily turned into a touchdown. Or I'm saying this game, if Hunter Henry would have found the end zone and finished with, 4 for 60, on 5 targets, 4 for 60 and a score, you're very happy with that performance. And he has had a knack for the end zone in each of his first 2 seasons. That was with Antonio Gates on the field. I'm not really worried about that. But at the same position, you've got TJ Hawkinson, who had a monster NFL debut. 6 receptions, 131 yards, and a touchdown on 9 targets. Yards after catch per reception was like 800, especially on that long run down the sidelines. But he's a rookie tight end, and rookie tight ends, it's a very volatile position, generally speaking, and there is some data to back this up. The 3rd year is usually when these quality pass catching tight ends really start blossoming, and their blocking is better, and their route running, everything just comes and falls into place. But he had a huge opening day, and I'm curious where you think he should be owned, because right now you're looking at projected ownership on TJ Hawkinson. Sorry about that. I had running back checked off. Is
2.5 on DK.
2.5%. Yeah, at 3K. I mean, I personally like Darren Waller a lot more and a couple of other guys, but I don't know. Maybe you're optimistic about this game for Hawkinson.
So let's circle back to Henry real fast because I was a non-believer on him, and he actually ran 31 routes in week one, which kind of surprised me. That's actually, 32. So that's more than George Kittle, more than Travis Kelce, less than some other random guys like Evan Ingram you might expect given the snaps or the targets that he had. He was one of the guys who ran more routes. Austin Hooper ran more routes, but that's a good amount of routes for Hunter Henry. So I think there is some hope for him, even though I was down on him coming into the year. If he's going to be running that many routes, and if we do see kind of some regression from Ekeler, I think that is something which would help him out. I think if Ekeler does fail, I would imagine that Henry rises because those guys are kind of competing for those same short range targets. So I think that's something in terms of a leverage play. If the ownership does appreciably go one way or the other, I think that's one thing to keep an eye on. But I think with Hawkinson, the thing for Detroit is that that pace for Arizona was so high, and Detroit's pace itself wasn't that fast. They were still just snapping the ball at 28.8 seconds, which is about run of the mill for this kind of faster paced week one. I think the volume isn't going to be there quite as much for all these guys where you saw so many targets. You saw 13 to Amendola, 9 to Hawkinson, 9 to Galladay, only 4 to Marvin Jones, but that's a lot of targets to go around with Stafford passing it that much. 45 attempts for Stafford. Those numbers should come down against a normal pace team. And the Chargers are a real slow down team. They were, especially in week one. They were last year. So I think overall there's probably less value for Hawkinson, but like the air yards per target, 16 air yards per target for Hawkinson. He was also super athletic with yards after the catch too. I think these are really good signs for him. But I think the issue is really like if people load up on Detroit and expect that performance again, I think this is going to be more on the side of a slower one where we'll see like kind of like the Chargers and the Colts were last week, where you have a couple outlier performances, but you're not going to see that across the board. Oh shit, Amendola's going off, Hawkinson's going off, everybody's going off. Like I don't think that's going to be the case here.
Yeah, I don't think that'll be the case either. Amendola, that big touchdown was on busted coverage too. So, not taking anything away from him, but taking something away from him. I think this is an interesting game though, because it's one where I don't know if a lot of ownership is going to be on either side outside of Austin Ekeler. And, Keenan Allen's fantastic. The matchup might not be perfect, but he is really good. I think right now, just on the surface, the total of this game is sitting at, what do we have it at? 20 or 47.5, 25 implied total for the Chargers, 22.5 for the Detroit Lions. And Keenan Allen I think he's pretty cheap, or I'm sorry, pretty low owned, 9.5%. Okay. So that's not that crazy. Not that low. Hunter Henry, 7%. So they are getting a little bit more right now than I would have originally expected. While on the other side, Galladay, 5.6%, Marvin Jones, 3%, Hawkinson, 2%, and then Kerryon Johnson, who was a colossal disappointment last week. This is what I wanted to get to. His price is still down, $5,700. We have him projected right now for the 7th highest ownership, not at his position, but overall at 18.2%. Spags, the way that game went last week, he should have really had every opportunity to produce. And he kind of did. He had 18 total looks, 18 touches. Their run game was as anemic as it could possibly get, combining him and CJ Anderson for just really, really underwhelming production. Is this them? Is it the line? Is it Arizona? What do you expect going forward? And is Kerryon Johnson worth this high ownership for the second straight week?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was a big Kerryon Johnson backer last week, and that killed him. He and Fournette both. That and like the lack of Ekeler is what killed my lineups, because I had a ton of Watkins. Felt good about that.
Me too.
And it sucks because like I do believe, especially with us, at Osmo, where we learn so much about game theory, and one of the things is like buying when there's blood in the streets, like the stock market expression. If Kerryon Johnson blew up for a lot of guys, like if Jameis Winston were on the slate, which thank the sweet Lord Jesus he's not, because I'd be playing him. People would just be afraid. And I get why you'd want to go there. He's still cheap. He did have some volume. I mean, the run defense wasn't graded well. I didn't think the Cardinals defense was that impressive either. So it's sort of hard to say, but the burst didn't seem like it was there. He wasn't getting targeted anymore. Like we thought maybe he'd get some of those theoretic targets. Those instead were going elsewhere. And now we have a lot of receivers here and tight ends who can justify getting more targets. So I don't know if the pass game work will be there. It's going to suck because this is going to be the week he goes for like 300 yards rushing, because he did do that last year. He had like the 200-yard game. I hate it, and I don't want to be there again. But if he's going to be chalky at that value price, you probably have to be there in the hopes that he has that Marlon Mack game. Though Marlon Mack looks special, and I don't think Kerryon Johnson looks special at all in week one.
No, Marlon Mack looked outstanding. And I think now after last week, we can place a little bit of faith in Frank Reich. I already was, but it's really nice to see that they formulated a game plan that kept them in it. And let me tell you, Malik Hooker's interception was outrageously good. Did you see that one-handed pick in the end zone? Holy hell, man. Beautiful. Their defense also kept them competitive. I don't think the Colts are a bad football team. Just throwing it out there. And I actually find this matchup really interesting on both sides between the two running backs, Marlon Mack and Derrick Henry, who had one of the most hilarious 75-yard touchdown receptions I've ever seen.
It's like, is that in slow motion?
Dude,
nope, that's just how he runs.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that no one was even close to catching him.
Him and AJ Brown both, they're just gigantic guys who run like probably still like a 4.5 40, but it's just, they were just plodding down the field that hilariously as guys just fall off of them.
I know, and that weird little piece of hair that sticks out of his helmet was just like bouncing up and down as he trotted down the sidelines. It was great. Look, I love Derrick Henry. I'm a fan of Derrick Henry. I've said it. I think that he's going to I think he has a legitimate chance of getting 300 total carries this season, as long as their defense is good enough to keep them competitive. I want to talk about this game though, and we're not going to get to every game because, we'll do a game by game breakdown tomorrow. Then we'll have Friday where we'll talk Fantasy Cruncher and really nail things down. And then Saturday, I believe it's Randone and Salvetri that are going to do, your final tune-up for Sunday. But I'm interested in this game, and one of the reasons for that is we don't get the passing work from Derrick Henry. And you know what? Maybe not from Marlon Mack either. Nyheim Hines might be that guy. I think Mack only had 1 or 0 passing targets last week. But both of them are clearly focal points on their respective offenses. And 5,900 right now, Marlon Mack projected at 1.6% ownership. Derrick Henry at 6K, 1.9% ownership. That needs to be talked about, Spags.
Oh, yeah, I'm fully with you on this one. These are two teams I think we talked about last week, and I'm with you on the Frank Reich take as well. Like, I think he's a guy who adapts to the talent he has, which is what you would think the NFL always does. But a lot of times they just kind of force their system on the guys.
For sure.
And just, and hope that they're going to pick it up.
That's a good point. He said we're going to run plays that Brissett likes and that work for Jacoby Brissett. That's a good point, yeah.
And I mean, and too, like T.Y. Hilton doesn't get enough credit because last year he was, Andrew Luck, kind of same thing, but like he's historically been a deep ball receiver, but now he's getting 7.4 air yards per target, doing a lot of underneath routes, still getting some deep targets, only one over 20 plus yards in week 1, but still like he's really adapting to the quarterbacks he has and what their skills are. And I think overall that's Frank Reich as much as it is T.Y. Hilton. But
Spags, just tell me if you agree with me. The most unheralded performance of week 1 was T.Y. Hilton.
Oh, yeah. In terms of keeping his team in the game and also kind of helping Jacoby Brissett out, where Brissett was looking for somebody to bail him out. He was looking for the Doyles and the Ebrons and those guys. Doyle has had some good rapport with Luck in the past, but I don't know that he's that guy for Brissett. Hilton was the safety blanket and also stretching the field at the same time. Like being able to do both those, I think, you're not going to look to Devin Funchess for that. And Paris Campbell's not there either. T.Y. Hilton's a guy whose versatility, like just very underrated in terms of his versatility overall.
Yeah, no question. But anyway, go ahead. Proceed with your thoughts on the two backfields here.
Yeah, so the running game, Marlon Mack, 25 attempts. You're right, 0 targets for Marlon Mack, but if he's going to get 25 rush attempts, and this is going to be a focal point. Tennessee actually was a good defense last week, but they were better at defending the pass. They gave up 5.1 yards per rush to Nick Chubb, but it got to a point where they were just pouring points on defensively and offensively, where Cleveland couldn't keep running the ball. If Indianapolis does squeeze the air out of the ball, and these are two paces again, 29.7 seconds per snap for Indianapolis, 30 seconds per snap for Tennessee. I was like 38, can't be right. 30 seconds per snap for Tennessee. So this is going to be a run game heavy game where we have 2 running backs over 20 touches in week 1. I think I would agree with you. I think Henry and Mack are guys I would consider this week. And the run defenses across from them really didn't show a lot in terms of stopping the run. So that's kind of the ideal spot if we're going to try to run the ball a lot against defenses who don't stop the run too well. This could be a really good spot for these guys to have value and maybe some sneaky game stacks, like probably not the quarterbacks, but the running backs or receivers here, at least for T.Y. Hilton, are probably in play.
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy at all. Like you said, game stacks, do we want to play Mack and Henry in the same lineups? I don't know. I haven't gotten that far yet, but if they're going to be sub 2%, it's just tough for me not to consider that, especially given that Tennessee gets down to the goal line. We know where the ball is going. Like, we just know where we know that Derrick Henry is going to be involved. He's going to get that goal line work. Look, he had a rushing touchdown. He had a receiving touchdown. That's not par for the course. But Derrick Henry getting 22 carries for 110 yards and a touchdown or 2 is very much in the cards. And that's what I'm looking for. I'd love to see him more involved in the passing game, but just knowing that he is the guy there is pretty encouraging. And the same goes for Marlon Mack. When you have, what did he have? How many carries did he have? I think it was 25. 25 yep. Carries.
Old school.
Yeah, right. That leads me to the next question though, Spags, is the other players here, Ingram and Damian Williams. We talked already about many of these guys, but not Ingram's, not Williams. And I'll throw Sony Michel into the mix as well. All of these guys are in spots that you could justify rostering them. And, right now, Sony Michel, Damian Williams getting ownership, but Sony Michel is getting virtually 0 ownership. And Mark Ingram, I think, is getting some, but it feels like a lot of ways to get away from chalk. I don't know if you need to, though, and that's the question. So who are your top guys here based on ownership and just based on your projection?
Yeah, I think to me, I mean, we talked about Kamara. He's the guy who I imagine is going to be my heavy wide receiver or my running back one. And I think it's for running back two. That's sort of where you cycle these guys in, where you do have a lot of value. You have Ingram, who's also still reasonably priced overall, in another spot where he's going to be in a pace-up matchup against Arizona. And they, even though they did get success against Kerryon Johnson and C.J. Anderson, I don't think that's so much on their end. I think Baltimore's going to be able to run the ball better. So I think there's a lot of guys, like, to me, it is you want a high upside, like pass catching running back for your first guy, and that's going to be the Kamara. And then I think just cycling these other guys into the flex and the RB2, because like we did see a lot of guys who had good opportunity who were in that similar price range. I think it might end up more like an MLB DFS slate where it's like, okay, I know my starting pitcher is going to be Verlander, and my SP2 is going to be a mix of like the guy shit my money plays, the 4,500 or total garbage, but could have that day where they just get a bunch of ground balls and survive. And I think that's what you probably can get away with running back too, where you cycle in Mac, you cycle in Henry, and you run it back with T.Y. Hilton, like you do some of those approaches. And I think that could be an approach that ends up being good if you are mass multi-entering tournaments.
I agree with that. But I will say that I plan on cycling in some Sonny Michel as well.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that.
And here's why. Look, it was a dismal performance. He literally had fewer rushing yards than rushes, and I think he had 15 carries. I think he had 14 yards on 15 carries. That's really, really bad, right? But this is a spot where you're an 18.5-point favorite. The New England Patriots are the type of football team that we could see a 3-4 touchdown game from the backfield, whether it's, 2 for Sonny Michel and 1 for James White, 3 for Sonny Michel. It just happens all the time when they're, heavy favorites and pull away with games. So if Sonny Michel in a game where they were effective everywhere outside of him still had 15 carries, I have no doubts that he could see 20 carries, 18 carries here. And to me, it's worth considering him. Do you think he's healthy?
I think he is. I mean, Pittsburgh has always been a team where you want to attack him through the secondary, even though they've kind of patchworked some of that stuff with getting Joe Hayden in there, who was a little bit past his prime, but helped them out over the stretch last year. I think it's a team where you don't really want to run against them quite as much. And I think the thing for me with New England, and it could certainly be easier this week for Michelle, they seem like they want to pass this year. It seemed like a real Tom versus time kind of thing where he wants to be like a high-level Pat Mahomes quarterback, whereas last year didn't pass quite as much, really relied on Michelle. I think this year maybe they trust the offensive line, trust Brady to be able to stand upright and be able to not get those hits and not get pressured as much, whereas accuracy drops off a cliff. And I think that's a situation where we could see them throwing a lot more this year because they're going to have these weapons, assuming we talked about Antonio Brown, assuming he's out there. Like, how can you not pass when you have these guys who are going to want their at least like 8 targets per game? I think it's going to be hard to get the same volume Michelle saw last year, but Miami gave up 643 yards last week. So
right.
Like, everybody's viable.
Right, exactly. Matt Breida saw 44% of the snaps last week. 26% went to Tevin Coleman, 29% to Raheem Mostert, and to Kyle Juszczyk, we saw 47%. How much of that was his involvement in the actual offense? Well, that's an entirely different story. He didn't see a single carry or snap or target. But I guess the question here is, and there's a lot of chatter right now in our YouTube chat, is Breida the guy that you want to play this week at that 5K price point?
It's hard to really say I want to play him because we talked about all these guys who were just a little bit more expensive.
Exactly where I'm at as well.
Yeah, like 15 rushing attempts to 9 rushing attempts for Mostert. I think there's probably some more pass game involvement to be tapped into for Breida. He only had 1 target in that first week. But yeah, I like Breida. I know he has the upside, but it does seem like they know he can't be a 20-touch guy. So he's not going to get there. So you need him to be really effective in his touches. And if you have Sonny Michel up, $1,000, if you have Mark Ingram in a similar price point, you have all these other guys we've discussed, the Marlon Macks, the Derrick Henrys. It's hard for me to justify going to Breida. But, Cincinnati is a team. Actually, no, Cincinnati did throttle Chris Carson last week. I'm looking at the numbers again. That's 3.9 yards per rush. That might not be a bad run defense for Cincinnati, even though they are a team who's going to pass it a lot and give a lot of clock time up for grabs because of that. I think it's just hard to go to Breida when you have those other dudes just a little bit more.
All right, let's take a look at some wide receivers, and then we will go beyond the numbers, Spags.
Oh, I can't wait.
We will get there very shortly. So I think we covered a lot of the running back position. Again, we've got 3 more days of the strategy show, the game plan show coming up. On the contrary, a whole lot of NFL live streams and programming here on YouTube and everything else at awesomemode.com. So DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, Lockett, Juju, these guys all getting, quite a bit of attention. Michael Thomas as well. Juju Smith-Schuster to me stands out against the Seattle team that just got absolutely gashed by John Ross last time out. Not sure if you knew this, but Andy Dalton threw for a career high in yards. First time he ever eclipsed the 400-yard mark. There were an incredible amount of holes in the Seattle defense, most of it being in the passing game. Like, they didn't really even need to run the football very often. Joe Mixon obviously got banged up, but it was a straight aerial attack for Andy Dalton, and it was successful. What are your thoughts on Juju and the passing game for the Steelers, which saw a really inefficient passing game all game long? Dante Moncrief had to have dropped 36 passes. Vance McDonald wasn't even involved until late in the third quarter. It was very uncharacteristic of this team, but you have to think Juju turns it around. And at this price point, man, it's going to be hard to stay away.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, he also got some slot routes. He got a good amount of slot routes, more than you would think. I don't have the number in front of me, but I think he was targeted about equally on his slot routes to his outside routes. And the outside, you could tell he was really struggling against the defense from Gilmore in particular. And I think that's not going to be the best for Juju when he has to play a lot of outside routes against elite corners. But as you mentioned, I mean, Seattle was just really bad. Their coverage grade from PFF, a 36. That is one of the worst in the entire league from week one. Actually, Miami, the only one who's worse with 29, it looks like. So that is elite company for Seattle. But I agree, it's a nice spot for Juju. Dante Moncrief is the bane of my existence. I've in both my season-long leagues. I played him in the Osmo Celeb League. I also played him in a ton of showdown lineups. And the ball was there every time. And he just dropped it or got swatted away.
Crazy.
But it was maddening. But overall, like, I think that this could be a spot for him to get going as well. Roethlisberger threw it a bunch. I think they really did show a desire to throw it a lot. And if Seattle does kind of clamp down on the run well, as they seem like they are doing versus Cincinnati, though, as you mentioned, Cincinnati didn't need to run. I think this could be a big Roethlisberger bounce back spot back at home too, which has always been a place that Ben plays better. I like Juju quite a bit, but I wouldn't sleep on Moncrief and Washington. Washington, another air yards guy getting targeted. He had 4 targets over 20 plus yards, which is tied for the most in the league. That's a lot of targets over 20 plus yards for James Washington. This pass attack, I think, is in a really nice spot for a bounce back. So I'm with you on that.
Would you run it back with anything, knowing that so check this out. Russell Wilson last week. So in week 1, Russell Wilson targeted exactly 2 wide receivers, right? 2. Incredible. He targeted Metcalf 6 times, who honestly, after seeing the strength and his ability to come down with those contested balls, he looked like a man amongst boys at times, overpowering some of those DBs. He really did. There's still some stuff to work on, but he saw 6 targets, and Tyler Lockett saw 2 targets. Those were the only 8 targets to wide receivers. Nick Vannett and Will Dissly saw 2 each. I mean, how do you have any confidence here? It's crazy to me. And Chris Carson, by the way, did see 7. Like, Chris Carson was featured more in the passing game than any of these players. A very, very underwhelming performance, not just in terms of yardage for Lockett, but dude, if you see 2 targets there, you have got to be not only disappointed, but concerned on 91% snap count.
Yeah, that was really strange to me because I did think he could pick up some of those Doug Baldwin routes, but it semed like DK Metcalf was the one who was getting all those. And Metcalf looked like a man out there. Like, he looked like a bigger Doug Baldwin.
He did.
I think, to me, I would expect that to hold up. Like, Metcalf, I think, is intriguing for season long. I think it's tough you mentioned, it's just tough to trust the volume right there. This team really wanted to squeeze the air out of the ball last year. They did it. This year, they seem to want to do the same, and they can certainly do it again. Especially in games where Carson's going to have more running success. I don't know if that's this game versus Pittsburgh. Given what we talked about with Sony Michel last week is the spot. But I think you got to trust the poor secondary coverage, which Pittsburgh also one of the poorest graded coverage defenses from PFF. And you trust Lockett and trust Metcalf. I think I think it seems like Metcalf is going to be the safer week-to-week DFS play, but the upside of Lockett, I mean, we saw in that one touchdown that they had a perfect QB rating, him and Wilson on deep throws last year. Could certainly happen again, but Lockett's just never going to be a volume guy, I guess, or they just don't view him in that lens, or they just don't want to do it. Whatever the reasons are, they're just not going to Lockett in the way you would want him to go to him.
So would you run back like a Roethlisberger, Juju, Moncrief stack with Metcalf, with Lockett, with what about with I think Carson could actually be the most interesting one here, just based on his involvement in both facets of the offense. And quite frankly, he was the only running back targeted in the passing game. Played 77% of snaps, which is a lot for a running back. And more importantly than anything else is we're seeing that Mike Davis' absence and, move to Chicago has affected him quite heavily.
Yeah, I mean, the targets for Carson being there, the fact that he got 7 targets in that game is a really good sign for him, I would think. It's hard to expect that every week moving forward,
sure.
But yeah, like I think I would still favor Lockett just because the big playability, and we saw Pittsburgh really struggle defending the deep ball. I mean, Josh Gordon probably could have had more if Tom Brady wanted to air it out more, and Philip Dorsett getting deep on plays. Like if Philip Dorsett can get deep on you, Tyler Lockett could definitely get deep on you. So he would still be the one I want, but he's chalky, so I could see going to Metcalf, who's going to have much less ownership. But I think both guys are in play here, and I think, yeah, you're talking about the Roethlisberger, Juju, Moncrief. I think Moncrief and Washington would both be in the mix for me as that second part of the stack. And maybe even Vance McDonald, even though he wasn't targeted, because it does seem stupid they just didn't target him at all. But yeah, I think there's a lot of ways you can do it, which I think is probably good for tournaments. If you are mass multi-entering, you can get different exposure to all these constructions.
Do you like any of these? We talked Juju, of course, already, but do you like any of these top-priced guys? Hopkins has got Jacksonville. Michael Thomas has the Rams. Devontae Adams, coming off an ugly week 1, has got Minnesota, who absolutely smothered Matt Ryan and the Falcons. And by the way, I know the Falcons don't play on the main slate, but Matt Ryan took 3 sacks where he held the ball less than 2.5 seconds, which to me is kind of alarming. I mean, that just tells you that, either they were bringing sacks, either they were blitzing from odd spots, or that line just absolutely didn't hold up even a little bit. Something to keep in mind. They got to him often. And with DeAndre Hopkins, man, all we heard about, and by the way, this guy's so good. It's absurd. All we heard about was Laramie Tunsil, bolster this offensive line. Well, no one took more sacks than Deshaun Watson in game 1. He took 6 sacks, and Tunsil got burned a couple of times. So the game was competitive in a tough environment against a good team, but that's got to be a little concerning. The good thing is he still got the ball to Hopkins as much as he needed to. I think Hopkins had like a 40% market share, something ridiculous.
Yeah, Watson was also sacked a bunch last year too. He had an 11% sack rate.
Highest in the league. No one got sacked more than Watson last year.
Yeah, so I mean, that's just kind of his game. He's probably holding on to it a bit too much. And also the line, we talked about the line issues. Even with Laramie Tunsil in there, it's still not a good line by any stretch. But yeah, I like Hopkins the most out of that group that you mentioned. Hopkins and Thomas would be the guys I like. I am not on Adams this week. I think we talked about it a little bit last week. I'm a big believer in the Minnesota defense and also just what they want to do. I think both they and Green Bay want to really hold the ball and keep and possess the ball. It's kind of been both Matt LaFleur and Mike Zimmer's MO, since Mike Zimmer's really made clear publicly, like that was one of my biggest wins of week 1 was not having that Minnesota pass attack and really leaning in on Dalvin Cook. And I think that's what they just want to do. Maybe this game goes sideways. Maybe Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers is like, man, I want to throw more this week. And he did throw more in the second half. But I think this could be a lower scoring game. Whereas like if you have Hopkins out there versus the Jacksonville defense who really couldn't cover everybody. We saw Sammy Watkins. I mean, I like Hopkins, but this could be the Will Fuller week where he was so close to breaking a couple big plays versus New Orleans. He did have a couple deep throws, but this could be the week where he has like the 150 yards and 2 TDs, and maybe Hopkins can also get there. But I think this is a Fuller week, and the Hopkins, if I had to rank them, I guess I would probably go Thomas, Hopkins, and then Adams a pretty distant third. But I think you could talk me into Hopkins because he's just so good. Even the ones like they're expecting him on the commentary to catch like diving, whatever, like one-handed catch, like he usually gets those.
I know.
That's not normal. It's not, you don't expect that of him.
Right? Like, yeah, I don't know. He must be feeling sick or something tonight.
Oh, he didn't catch that one with his foot on that throw that he was going to get sacked on. Like, oh, I guess that happens sometimes for him.
Reporters are asking him after the game, like, so what happened on that diving ball that was 15 yards away from you. Yeah, no, you're right though, man. It's really crazy. One more receiver here, and then we'll get into our stats. You've prepared some good stuff for us. If Antonio Brown doesn't play, by the way, we just got reports that Bill Belichick is not taking questions about Antonio Brown. That should surprise exactly no one. And he said that Antonio Brown will be practicing with them this week. According to Ian Rappaport, Patriots coach Bill Belichick, in a tense press conference, says Antonio Brown will practice but won't commit to him playing against the Dolphins. He did not add to the statements that Brown and his accuser provided. So that's a little insight there. He also said when asked about Sunday that they will take it one day at a time. So you know what that tells me, and Bill Belichick usually doesn't even let on that much. It's kind of enlightening. It seems like he's basically saying, look, man, some shit may come out tomorrow or later today. I'm not committing to anything.
Which is classic Belichick. Also, I was just thinking about it. Like, could you imagine Tom Brady and Gisele's reactions when they see the news as like Antonio Brown is staying in their house? Do they go and have a conversation in the guest house, or they just let that ride? What do you think?
So, Antonio.
It's like he's eating cereal at the table. He's like, man, like, come on.
with that blonde mustache. Oh, man.
This milk on it, dude. He's been down in a bowl of Lucky Charms.
Oh, God. Yeah, I mean, that kind of puts him in a tough position for sure. But
yeah, I don't want that guy in my guest house.
And look, by the way, just so everyone, the situation itself is not funny. So we're not making fun of the situation itself, just the awkward situation that Tom Brady and his, gorgeous wife would be in. So, yeah, that have fun with that one. I'm not envious. I'm envious of Tom Brady, but not today. So let's do it, man. Well, actually, no, I wanted to ask you about Gordon and Edelman. Like, do you see their value rising exponentially if Brown sits? Or is cut?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really hard to argue against over 600 yards given up in week one. Even if they regress positively, we're talking like 450 yards. So that's still a lot. And I mean, Josh Gordon is a deep target. They do different things that complement each other. It'll be frustrating to see James White all of a sudden, have like a two receiving touchdown day, or New England just doesn't go hard in this one and doesn't do what the betting public seems like they'll expect them to do, which is just throttle them. But I do think this seemed like a New England team who wants to throttle people this year and maybe even thinks they could go 17-0, because really the defense for New England is the one that's getting all the hype.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to really question it. I think you have to think about other lineup constructions, like, one with Michelle and the New England defense, that old school positive correlation thing with a running back and defense might be in play. But I think you need to have a good mix of both Gordon and Edelman in there, and even some Philip Dorsett if we don't get Brown.
Man, how do you regress positively when your first game came against Lamar Jackson? I mean, that's a tough one to wrap my head around for sure. All right, man, let's do it. Going beyond the numbers with Chris Spags here. He came up with some good stuff, and we're going to jump into it. Before we do, though, should remind you that Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports is the sponsor of the Deeper Dive, and once again running some awesome Week 2 NFL contests. The $1 Million Baller, $1 million prize pool, $100K to first, and a nice flat payout structure, so you're still making good money. You come in some of those top positions, and in terms of doubling up your money, you don't have to come in the top 6% just to double your money. The other day on Draftkings on Monday night, I cashed 64 of 70 lineups, Spags, and I didn't double up. So there you have it. Yeah, and that $10, unbelievable. But that is what it is. You will double up here. It's a nice structure, and even though there's 150 max on the $1 Million Baller now, I still think there's going to be some overlay. I mean, okay. I think they filled 29,000 of 40,000 last time, and now there's 50,000. We'll see. But as we've been saying, you got to start making lineups yesterday to get 150 in. So I still see that being the case. And just a ton of other great contests, $75K, $10 to enter, NFL guaranteed. Some of these no management fee contests as well. You want to jump in like today, MLB, $3, $4,500 prize pool, zero management fee. That's still open. Get $30 though in Yahoo Sports Rewards points simply by signing up through us at Awesemo. You can use it on the site as cash to win play and withdraw money. So sign up. Go to the MLB tab at awesemo.com. Click on the Spotlight Hitters article. It's right on that landing page. Totally free. The link is right at the top. Use that Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports link and get your $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points upon signing up and depositing. You won't regret it, especially not for NFL.
No, I mean, yeah, real fast. Like Josh mentioned it last week when we were doing Live Before Lock, where if you basically had an entry in the $1 million baller, you were winning money the second it started. So that's certainly a positive. I agree too. With it being a 150 max, I imagine you'll see a lot of people who probably even register those lineups and don't get the 150 max in because they think they can hand build faster than they probably can. There's going to be a lot of edge to have there. And we talk a lot about Reich on a lot of our shows, but Yahoo and some of our other sponsors are really good at providing that Reich advantage, which, as Laffy mentioned, they'll kill you time and time again, 64-70 and not doubling up. That's a fun, terrible stat in the world of DFS.
Yeah, and I had some of them that were, like closer to the top too. So what are you going to do, man? It's a grind. So let's go beyond the numbers. No hyperbole here.
Not even a little.
Not even a bit. Is Josh Allen the greatest deep ball passer ever? Asks Chris Spags. Spags, let's break down these numbers. I might even say let's go beyond them and see why Josh Allen could be the greatest deep ball passer ever. By the way, complete hyperbole, but we're about to explain to you why the deep ball might get better and could really benefit some of his pass catchers. Go ahead.
Yeah, so look, the flaw with Josh Allen, this is what I identified with him, which we're going to talk about with our next stat too, which makes it a little bit tougher to figure out this year. The thing with Josh Allen last year was we all know about the rushing upside. The thing a lot of people didn't talk about was he just threw deep balls. He threw a lot of deep balls over 5 passes of plus 20 yards each game. And that's a lot. That's a lot of number. That basically just gives you opportunity. And that's what we're all about with DFS, opportunity. So when a guy's targeting deep, he is a guy who's going to have value. Josh Allen last year, he just had a 62.9 QB rating and 36.5% accuracy on passes of 20 plus yards and overall 64.7% adjusted completion percentage. Week 1, obviously a very small sample size, but on passes of 20 plus yards, he had a 135.4 QB rating. So he doubled up his QB rating, 50% deep accuracy, which is up where you want it to be, and an 84.8% adjusted completion percentage overall. So that is up 20% on his numbers from the previous year. So he's actually completing passes now. He has more talent around him. That certainly doesn't hurt. Is Josh Allen the greatest deep ball passer ever? I'm going to err on the side of caution and say yes, with many exclamations.
Yeah, erring on the side of caution is exactly what you're doing here.
I mean, look, the spot versus New York is as good as you're going to get. The Giants got strafed by Dak Prescott last week, who also another guy who's throwing the ball deep a lot more with Kellen Moore as his coordinator. That's exciting to see as both a Cowboys fan and a fantasy football player. But yeah, I think Josh Allen is in a stellar spot. We could see more running from him this week. John Brown was an elite play in week 1. I think he's going to be an elite play again in week 2. Zay Jones still got 2 targets over 20 plus yards. Cole Beasley was getting targeted. Devin Singletary, everything's going to open up for him with Josh Allen throwing it deep more. This is a stack that I think can really go off this week. And it looks like the ownership isn't there right now. And I'm going to tout him as hard as I can to get it up because I'm self-defeating in a variety of ways.
Yeah, well, fair enough to me. And one of the big things too is that Miami defense got a lot of chatter after week 1. We should be talking more about the Giants. I was amazed at how the coverage would just fall apart. I mean, Dak Prescott had 6 deep ball attempts, 3 touchdowns on passes 20 plus yards. It's crazy. He completed 5 of his 6 deep ball attempts. Do you know how rare that is in any game to do that? Like Minshew and Dalton were 2 for 2 or 2 for 3. Brady was 3 for 3, but 5 for 6, man. 155 yards and 3 touchdowns on those passes. Like we're both saying it's not to say that Allen is going to do the same thing, but he's definitely going to try to.
I mean, the thing too to me is the Jets defense last year was one of the better PFF graded coverage defenses. Granted, you lose Todd Bowles, you go to Adam Gase. That is going to be a bit of a drop off in that respect because Gase is not as good of a coach. I mean, he's not a guy defensively who is a factor, but Bowles is certainly a defensive minded guy. But I think we saw this against the Jets and he was legitimately good. And Josh Allen was unlucky. He had the picks that he did throw were short passes that got tipped up, even though they hit the receiver in the hands a couple times. That's not Josh Allen's fault. I just think it's a really nice spot for him overall to kind of capture the value you want from him. His price is reasonable. And that Giants defense is one where I think they're going to be giving up a lot of production on the year. I don't see easy fixes for the Giants. And I think Buffalo happens to do exactly what Dallas wanted to do. And I think Buffalo's going to do it well. John Brown, to me, is a guy who it could blow up the slate today. He had 28 points in week 1. It wouldn't shock me to see him get that again, if not more.
No, absolutely agree with you. And keep in mind, all targets are not created equally. What I mean by that is, yes, Cole Beasley saw only one fewer than John Brown, but John Brown's targets, the upside on those is just so much different than it is for Cole Beasley, who, on 7 receptions is lucky to get 50 yards. You're just not going to see a lot of that for Cole Beasley. So, look, I think Brown saw 3 deep ball attempts. So half of Josh Allen's deep ball attempts went to John Brown. I'm all about it, man. I'm with you. These 2 guys I really like for this week. And I kind of like, while we're on the topic, I like Devin Singletary.
Oh, yeah.
Now, one of the reasons is, first of all, only 4 carries. But if you're Doug McDermott, how do you not look at this and be like, this guy broke off every single one of his carries? It's not like he had a 68-yard carry and then a -4 and then a 3 and then a 2-yard carry, Spags. That's not what happened. He had a 20-yard carry, a 23-yard carry, a 12-yard carry, and a 15-yard carry. Those were his 4 carries, right? I mean, he broke it off every single time for double-digit yardage, which to me is really impressive. Look at Frank Gore and ask yourself, are we going to continue to see someone like Singletary only get 4 carries? Frank Gore had 11 for 20. He averaged 1.8 yards per carry and had a long rush of 9 yards. Also, Devin Singletary in this game, if you take a look at his snap counts, it was even more encouraging. He played 70% of the offensive snaps, while Frank Gore played 28, and only 8 more than he had carries. So Singletary, I think, is going to be involved in the passing game again. But I personally, and you know what? Hold me to it. We're recording right now, so you can come back to it. I'd be shocked if Singletary's carry count doesn't go up at least somewhat significantly in this game.
Yeah, Singletary's got a little Ekeler to him, I think, except that in college, he really handled a full load. He was one of few college running backs coming out this year who actually had, I think, over 25% of his offense's yards, I think, is in terms of passing and receiving, which is one of the things that Spark tracks if you want to check out the player profiler for him. Not an elite Spark athlete, but a guy who did have the college dominator in terms of just that yardage. I think he can handle 15 touches. I mean, it's probably not going to get there this week. There were 15 combined rushing attempts between him and Gore, and then 7 targets for Singletary. But I think he can have more success in the pass game than he had to. He only had 5.6 yards per catch, and that was against a good coverage Jets team who also tackles pretty well and has probably maintained a lot of the fundamental principles from Todd Bowles. But yeah, like I agree with you. I think an Allen Singletary, John Brown stack to me looks really good for this week, and one that I think could have a lot of upside. And these guys, based on our first run of ownership projections, not own Josh Allen going to be the most owned guy out of all of them at 5%, and that's a chef's kiss emoji with to honor my Italian heritage.
And one more thing, this is another thing that tells me that Doug McDermott pulled his head out of his ass. 94 of his 98 yards from scrimmage came in the second half, Spags.
That's crazy. The numbers really do jump out for Singletary. I think looks great, and I think it's one of those dudes that is going to get better as the year goes on. And if you got him early and you got him and you invested in him, feel better about that than I do about picking up TJ Yeldon in our Awesemo league. That was not the best.
So let's move on. Last year, Tyreek Hill led the NFL in targets at 20 plus yards with 2.6. I guess that's 2.6 per game in a high octane.
Yep, you got it.
High octane offense. Week 1, James Washington, Devontae Parker, Kenny Golladay, DK Metcalf, Kirk, Hawkinson, Lattimore, John Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, McLaurin, Terrell Williams, John Ross, all of them had at least 3. It's funny because Manny Laura and I said on Awesemo Radio on Sunday that it was totally the week of the speedsters. Deshaun Jackson only had 2, but he broke them both off for touchdowns. There were many more. You're asking, and it's a good question, Is this a trend, and should we expect this to continue from week 2 and onward?
Yes, I mean, I think it's a thing we can expect. Certainly, defenses will adjust a bit more when they see a concerted effort by a lot of teams who you wouldn't even expect to try to blow the top off of a defense. Like we talked about, kind of the risk aversion of Seattle. They're doing that with DK Metcalf and not doing it with Lockett yet. Even Oakland, who was very conservative last year, doing it with Terrell Williams. It's a lot of guys. I mean, you did that list. Like those are all guys who got 3+ targets over 20 yards. If they kept that up over the course of the year, and that's certainly going to slip and slide back and forth and change. Even if they were at, they drop down a half a point, and you have some days where you have one, or some weeks where you have one rather. Like they're still going to be around that Tyreek Hill range, and Tyreek Hill was an outlier last year, so it's a crazy number to look at. And I think this is really something to consider in tournaments, is that you could have more opportunity for these guys moving forward, especially against a lot of these weak defenses that we've talked about. They're the Giants defense, the Miami defense, some of the Seattle, the Pittsburgh ones. Like there's a lot of really poor performances. Some of those could level out. Seattle and Pittsburgh, you would think, would level out more, but the Giants and Miami are going to be historically bad this year. And I think you really need to try to find these guys who have that potential. And you're also looking for routes run too. Like you're not necessarily just going to the Marquise Browns of the world, but you are trying to get guys who are running a lot of routes and are getting targeted deep. And there's enough of these guys here who, I mean, we just listed 11 of them. Like that's a lot of dudes getting deep targets. And that has to be part of your process, I think.
I think so too. Last one here, Damian Willis of Cincinnati, Demir Byrd of Arizona, and Keyshawn Johnson of Arizona as well were among the top 10 in routes run in week 1 with 49, 53, and 49 respectively. The results were all mediocre. Willis, by the way, played a ton of snaps. Routes run is an indicator of opportunity. Which, if any of these, will be useful over the course of the year? I think this is a great question that you pose, because targets and receptions and yards, they only tell a piece of the story. But with guys like Byrd and Willis and Keyshawn Johnson, how much of the story does routes run tell?
Yeah, I mean, I think for these guys, especially for Arizona, we've known about the pace all year long. I think that's a team where you can see, we saw a lot of targets going to Kirk and Fitzgerald. That's certainly going to hold up. But if you have Byrd and Johnson out there this much, and as a real willingness to throw deep by Arizona, it's not going to shock me if Byrd or Keyshawn Johnson, one of these guys, has an outlier week here and there. Guys you really don't need to put a lot of in tournaments, but guys that I think are just worth having on your radar, especially against Baltimore this weekend, who is a good defensive team who I think was legitimately good last year, should be legitimately good again this year, even though we don't really know after seeing them go against Miami how that's going to shake out. They're going to bring pressure against Kyler Murray. They're probably going to get some turnovers and stuff, but it still does seem like a spot where one of these guys could get that long pass this week and be out there. And I just, the opportunity for these guys, and Willis as well, as long as AJ Green is out. We saw John Ross have the big week. Certainly you're going to see some adjustments to account for that this week. I think Willis is a guy who could benefit from that, where Tyler Boyd, I just don't trust his ability to get separation overall, even though going against Pittsburgh, who really covered poorly last week, could help out. You could see a guy like Willis have that sneaky week this year. So I think it's just another stat to keep an eye on and hopefully track these guys. And if they're out there running routes, they can catch passes. And that's sort of what you're hoping for. You're looking for the opportunity and the signifiers before the actual results come. And if you're trying to find the next Marquise Brown's been found. We all know Hollywood now, if you didn't know him from college. These other guys you may not know yet, but you could see them have the big week in week 2.
If you had to pick one of these guys to impress upon or impress after last week, who would it be of these 3 guys?
It would probably be Keyshawn Johnson, I think, in terms of just it seemed like he had more opportunity. He actually had 10 targets in that game, which kind of a surprising number for a guy who is also not related to the actual Keyshawn Johnson and not named for him either, which I thought was fun, even though he's also wearing number 19 and is in fact named Keyshawn Johnson, but spelled differently. But yeah, he's a guy who I think could be targeted more. It did seem like Kyler Murray was looking for him a lot. But Willis, again, as a pivot, if people are going to go to John Ross this week, or if people are going to expect just chase that Andy Dalton volume. He threw 50 times last game. If John Ross is covered for more of them this time out, you could see Willis out there running a ton of routes, just kind of sees that opportunity in a big way where it only takes two or so plays, again, of that 20+ yards to really blow up. And he could be a dude who does that.
All right. If you guys have any questions, that was beyond the numbers, by the way. If you guys have any questions, hit us up in YouTube or Slack chat. We'll hit on them now before we get out of here. One from Killer Goen says, does Thielen open up this week? Dude, 11 dropbacks, 10 pass attempts for Kirk Cousins in week 1. There were rumors that Zimmer fired John DeFilippo last season because he wasn't running the ball enough and that he had been telling him to run the ball more. Look, I think we all know that Cousins isn't going to throw 10 times per game on the regular, but now you have to assume that if they're playing with a comfortable lead, it's going to be straight run it down your throat. And also, listen, by the way, it's only one game, but you were on this in our sleepers, busts, and breakout article for wide receivers. You had mentioned, and bust is a relative term, right? You had mentioned that Thielen and Diggs could be bust because you expect a lot more rushing attempts and a lot less passing. Tell me what week one for Minnesota does for you. Does it adjust your style of thinking at all? And how do you think, if at all, it changes against Green Bay, which you have to imagine it does? But Minnesota's defense is very good, Spag, so it's not like just because you're playing a good team, Kirk Cousins is going to throw 40 times a game now.
I mean, this is one of the takes I had where like Alex was very big on him on a projection basis on the receivers and Kirk Cousins on a projection basis. And whenever Alex, I think we all feel this way, whenever Alex is very on something and we feel the other way, it's like, shit, am I wrong here? But like, I really did want to dig my heels in. I agree. This is a very outlier game. They're not going to throttle a team as badly as they did Atlanta every single week. But I think it's just hard to maintain that over 9 targets per game that we saw from Thielen and Diggs last year. That's a really high volume. That's like the volume that we're seeing going to like these Bengals teams, the Cardinals teams. Like it's, if Minnesota really is concerted and dedicated to running, and we had about a 4-game sample size showing that down the stretch where Thielen had 4.5 targets per game, Diggs at 7.3. I think those are more the numbers to expect moving forward, or at least close to those. But yeah, I am just going to keep fading this offense for now. I think the thing when you don't fade them is when you think the other side is going to score. So like, I didn't mind the idea of the Minnesota passing offense if Matt Ryan got off and Julio got off or Ridley got off. But if those guys don't, I think Minnesota's going to play it as close to the vest as possible. They have a really good back. Dalvin Cook was running violently. Him and Madison both just smashing into dudes over and over again. And a couple of good plays for Cook that were called back as a holding penalties. Like, these guys are looking nasty. And I think that's what they want to do. That's how you're going to win, I think, for them. And it seems like it's going to bear out. So I would keep fading the passing game for now. But you know, Green Bay too showed a lot on defense versus Chicago. So I expect a defensive one here again. So I think I'll feel right for one more week, and then they'll like blow up in week 3.
Yeah, you're exactly. We got about 5-6 minutes left, run it up to 12:30 Eastern time. Stick with us until the end. We're going to take some questions and respond to some comments. While you're at it though, hit us with a thumbs up. If you like the show, you want to help support us here at awesomemode.com and help support our YouTube channel. We love you for it, and we appreciate you clicking that button. I know it's a lot of work, but you know what? It's worth it. And good things will happen to you as a result. Subscribe and hit the notification bell as well, so you always know when content's dropping next. Interesting comment here by Eric. He says, if Nagy doesn't pound the rock with David Montgomery, he should be fired. Trubisky will be a turnover machine if they try to air it out. Now, forget about the latter part of that sentence or of that comment and focus on the first part. People are pissed that David Montgomery saw only 6 attempts. He had one nice run, but outside of that, it was okay. 27-yard reception as well. Going into Denver, do you think David Montgomery gets far more involved in this offense, or do we see another? And keep in mind, there was never a time where there was more than a 1-possession game on either side against Green Bay. Tariq Cohen had 10 targets and was basically used as a slot man. And Mike Davis was, I think, used far more frequently than anyone had assumed. 5 carries, but 7 targets. David Montgomery was kind of the odd man out.
Yeah, I think, you know, you'll see those numbers level out a bit because it seems to me, and I think most people would agree, I'm sure, including you, because I think you enjoy Montgomery's talents as well. I think he's a better pass catcher than Davis is, and long term, I would expect him to be out there more. But he's a rookie. You know, he doesn't have the, you know, might not be able to pick up blitz pickups quite as much as you would see Mike Davis, a guy who's been in the league for a few years who can figure that out. But I think for now, yeah, the workload seems tough. I think I would be more inclined to trust Cohen with the volume that he got, but Mike Davis could be sneaky because he is pretty cheap this week, and he did get that volume in week 1. Though Denver did, even though Josh Jacobs had those results, they didn't get a good yards per rush. It's not a perfect stat, but still only 3.5 yards per rush allowed by the Denver defense. The secondary was much worse, I thought, than the run defense was. But I agree. Like, I think it's a tough backfield to go to, and I think Cohen stands out as probably the most interesting one because if he's going to get that pass game involvement, even if he's not getting touches, like, I think he's a guy who's involved in the offense in a way, even though he cut into Anthony Miller and Taylor Gabriel a bit. I would trust Cohen the most out of that group, but I think for now, I would favor Mike Davis at a cheaper price and a little bit less of the hype machine on Montgomery, even though the talent really is there for Montgomery in a big way. That one catch he had versus Green Bay was awesome. I think Mike Davis can't do that in a million years.
Yeah, and by the way, that Green Bay defense looked like legitimately solid.
Yeah.
So I don't want to take away from that. Aaron Rodgers after the game was like, "We got a defense. That's all that matters. We got a defense." I mean, he was feeling it.
Yeah.
Jeremy Woodward says, "What do you feel about LaShawn McCoy versus Oakland?" Another interesting question, Spags, because he led the team in rushing with 10 for 81. He had 12 yards on a single reception on one target, but Damian Williams was no slouch himself. Now, he had a score and only averaged 2 yards per carry, but I don't want to ignore the fact that he saw 13 attempts and 6 targets. Just because McCoy was here does not mean that Williams was not the most frequently targeted and used running back on Sunday.
Yeah, I think McCoy, the way I feel like this is just my gut instinct, I think Williams is going to end up being the passing down back. He'll still get some carries, and McCoy will end up being the lead rushing back because you could tell, I think McCoy's just a little more comfortable running through the line still, even though Williams had a lot of success. Last year, a lot of that was a lot of pass game involvement and also just against weaker teams. I think McCoy, he showed he had more left in the tank, which I thought he did. I thought he was in a decent spot. If he played in Buffalo, clearly they're comfortable with Devin Singletary, and I think that's a logical move with what we saw of them. But McCoy is a guy, if he's getting the volume as a rusher in this offense, it's hard to trust him with the pass catching ability because I do think Williams is a little better in that. But a really good breakaway grade from PFF in week 1. And I think McCoy showed he's got more left in those legs. And I would ride that while I can and try to save Williams. And if McCoy did get banged up, Williams will be there in the end, or hopefully be there in the end and be able to pick up the pieces like he did last year.
Couple guys saying that, this guy's the workhorse, this guy's the work. I don't think there will be a workhorse in this Kansas City backfield. 19 total looks for Damian Williams, though. I'm all right with that. Here's a good one for you, Spags. Maybe you can help out. Where is he? Where'd he go? Here he is, Timothy. What about Fournette and his efficiency going forward? Is the Jags offensive line that bad? ? Last one here. Make it good.
Oh, no pressure at all. I think the pass game involvement for Fournette is a real helpful thing. He got 6 targets in that game, only 13 rushing attempts, but you'd expect that with how Kansas City pulled away. I think the fact that's going to help Fournette out is that Minshew didn't look terrible. I think he's on the cusp of playability this week, not at high volume, but like a good completion rate, not targeting deep downfield, which sucks, but he was accurate. He was getting protected well. He has a cool mustache and has like a fun vibe, which I think makes it fun to play. Sounds like a Pokemon name.
Cool mustache is never a fun vibe, in my opinion.
But he's got like a 70s throwback look, and I forgot, he had like a fun quote too about not being intimidated.
That's cool.
They have a good vibe at Jacksonville, even though that was a tough loss, and clearly they disappointed me personally, disappointed Laffy personally with the Leonard Fournette's performance. I think if people are down on Fournette, it's probably a good time to go back. Houston's defense did give up 7.8 yards per rush last week, even though, that is a lot of Alvin Kamara being historically great and elite. But Fournette, I think if he gets the opportunity, if they do hold Houston down, the issue is really that pass defense for Jacksonville looks so bad. And is that Kansas City, or is it that they're that bad outside of Jalen Ramsey? Might be the latter. And Houston is legitimately very good as a pass attack as well. So if it could get away from Fournette again, but I still think he's worth the exposure with where the field is right now, 14%. I'm cool with that. That's about right. Just, a little bit less than the 50 I had last week. Hang me.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that wasn't fun at all, was it?
He tried. He tried his best. He got 6 targets, man.
I know. Fumbled one of them, that son of a bitch.
He did.
Spags, close us out. Any last words?
Play Josh Allen, play that Buffalo stack, and prepare to hear about them on everything I do this week, because those are my boys. I'm excited for this spot, and I think it's gonna be a fun week. Really though, think about how the NFL differs year to year, and I think there are a lot of things we talked about throughout this hour, a lot of things that you'll talk about on these shows, and that Sal and the rest of the guys at Manny will talk about on these shows. That a lot of things seem to be changing in the NFL right before our eyes, where there's a lot of statistical anomalies, which I don't think we saw after week 1 last year. And I think they're going to be something to track throughout the year that could give you a bit of an edge relative to a tough NFL DFS field.
How tilted will you be if Josh Allen just tosses up a goose egg?
I'll be a little sad. I'll be a little sad with the 75% Josh Allen.
Throw it into the Fournette basket. That'll do it for us.
Yeah, I'll be like, oh man, Fournette went off this week, but Josh Allen just threw 7 picks to the Giants.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, all right. Thanks again. And if you can remember before you head out, hit a thumbs up. And look, if you like the show, tell your friends, share the video with people that you want to get into DFS and want to help them learn the game better. We think we do a pretty good job of helping with that here and giving you pretty solid insight each and every day. So share it with people you like, not with those you don't. And we'll see you back here tomorrow on the Strategy Show. It's myself, Dave Loughran, and Sal Vetri going to start again at 11 a.m. That's easy for me to say. 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It's the matchups going game by game, comprehensive breakdown. Chris Baggs, myself, will be back next Wednesday. And you got On the Contrary coming up. We doing Friday or Saturday this week?
We're doing a joyous Saturday for me where I'll get to hang out. But no, it'll be fun. I forget who our guest is, but it's somebody good. It'll be a surprise because I don't remember how to promote properly. Subscribe to the notification bell. It'll be me and Osmo and another really good guy. We're doing a lot of good rotating third mics. It was a lot of fun with Travis Petty in week 1.
That was an awesome show.
Player. Yeah, and this week we got another. I think we have an NFL analyst whose name escapes me, but it'll be somebody good. We did a lot of work picking him, but so they'll be coming up on Saturday. So watch that. Watch the Strategy Show. I have a lot of content coming for you on Saturday.
Well, I don't know what shows are coming up later today, but tune in and it'll be fun. Well,
they're always great. Who cares? They're just watch them.
Yeah, MLB Deeper Dive, Live Before Lock. We got it all. We even got those prime time Live Before Lock Sunday, Monday, and Thursday night football shows, which have been getting a lot of attention for good reason. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Strategy Show.